think I'm on. Yes, I am on. Thank you so much for that beautiful song. I think it went right along with the children's story, didn't it? Just something small that we can do, but we can take our cross and follow Jesus. Such a blessing to be here with you this morning. I am just so grateful. I felt like monopolizing your whole praise time because my heart is just full of gratitude that we are here and our stuff is in the state of North Carolina and nothing is left in Kentucky. We drove back to Kentucky on Sunday, and we had exactly we basically had 48 hours to pack up the house and load the truck and be ready to go. And because we arrived late, about midnight Sunday night, and Monday was Daniel's birthday, so we were able to pack for a half day, but then we spent the other half with his mother and had a really nice visit with her. And then Tuesday morning we had to rent the truck, so that left us with Tuesday afternoon and all day Wednesday to be done. And God worked miracles. I'm very grateful. We had I had notified a lot of people that we needed help, but nobody had committed. And so I didn't know what we were going to get. And God just lined it up perfectly, so everybody showed up in shifts throughout the 2 days. And nobody died except Daniel and I. And it all got done. And at 7 o'clock Thursday morning, we pulled out of there. Because we had to make a 3-hour detour to go sign the papers on our house before we could drive the stuff the rest of the way here. So by the time we arrived here at 11 p.m. on Thursday night, we were tired, and our kitties had been in the car for 13 hours, and they survived. So we have the truck parked at one person's house in their driveway, and we have the kitties at another person's house, and our camper is a third person's house, but it's all in one state. So this Monday we signed the papers on our new home here. So we are just absolutely thrilled and thanking God, and hopefully by next Sabbath I will not be camping. And I know you guys are grateful for cold weather, but I'm not yet, because I'm camping in it. I'm thankful we have a little heater in our little bitty camper. It's about this big, and it plugs into an outlet. And it ran all night last night nonstop, but it kept us warm enough that we did not freeze. So I'm grateful. So I think we have some slides that we'll be pulling up. And let's see, in all of my grabbing, I think I left my cell phone on the piano. So while they're pulling up the slides here, I'm going to pull them up here too so that I can see which ones they are and where they're at. I have to apologize to a couple of you, but I'm not going to apologize. I'm just going to say that you get to hear it twice. There's a couple that heard me do this in Salisbury, but it never hurts to hear it again. And there's always a few more things that change along the way. How many of you here like mountains? Most of you. Well, about half of you. Okay. Well, you don't live very far from them. They are very close by here, and I'm grateful. There we go. Got some mountains. If you want to flip to the next slide, you'll see, a few of you have seen this picture already with my family and I when I was a kid. I grew up in the mountains. I can't say I was born in the mountains because I was actually born in Tennessee, in Memphis, and there are no mountains there. But when I was 7 years old, my family moved to Washington State, and we lived, if you take the state of Washington, it's kind of like a square, right? I mean, generally, not exactly. But it has about 4 climates because it's such a large area. It's got more climates than North Carolina does, but similar. It has the coast on the Pacific Ocean, and you have the rainforest, and then it has on the edge of the rainforest, there's a big mountain range called the Cascades. And all the rain stops there. That's why there's a rainforest on the coast, because on the exact other side of the Cascades is a desert, sagebrush and all. And so you got sagebrush for a little while, and then you get to the east side of Washington State, on the northeast side, and there you have what they call semi-arid, which means you get rain in the spring and fall, you get snow in the winter, but no rain all summer. So from June to September, we wouldn't have a drop of rain. We called that fire season. And lots of green evergreen trees, but the grass was brown. And then you have the southern part of Washington, which you've got the Columbia Basin along the Columbia River, where you have like desert and then green right next to the river. And then you have the beautiful farmland. You've got the wheat fields, and you have where all the apples and potatoes are grown. And yes, I know Idaho is famous for its potatoes, but Washington State grows more potatoes than Idaho does. And we call them Watatoes because we're kind of like partial to our potatoes. So if you ever want to feed me, just give me potatoes and I'll be happy. But anyway, that's where I grew up. In my little corner of Washington State was in that semi-arid part. We had the high mountains. In the winter time, we did not see the yellow line on the road from November till March. And it was just solid snowpack. We didn't have a lot of ice. We had mostly snowpack. And everybody had a four-wheel drive car because otherwise you didn't go anywhere from November till March. And our joke was we had 3 seasons. We had snow season, mud season, and fire season. That was our 3 seasons we had. But I loved the mountains. Absolutely loved the mountains. And my parents had a beautiful home that was surrounded by mountains. The Canadian mountains were within range. We could see them from our neighbor's house, the Canadian Rockies. And we were surrounded. I think the mountain that was directly out my bedroom window was about between 3 and I think it was 4,400 was the elevation of the mountain outside my bedroom window. And just a little ways away, we could hike to a mountain that was elevation of 6,700. That was the highest point in our county. And just a little ways drive, we could backpack in the mountains up to 14,000 feet tall. So we're talking real mountains. Mount Mitchell is beautiful, and it's right in that 6,000 range, but it's not in the 14,000 range. So I like all mountains, including Mount Mitchell. I love it. I love the Smokies, love the Blue Ridge Parkway. So if you could fast forward just a few pictures until you get to the picture of our house. You'll recognize our Kentucky house. Actually, if you get to our engagement picture, stop there. Okay, one more, I think. Yep. Okay, there. Now you can see the mountains out my bedroom window. All right, go ahead and 2 more, and you'll see our house. So when I got married and moved from Washington State to Kentucky, I told my husband, I will move out there on one condition, that you take me to see mountains once a year. That's all I ask. And I don't care if it's the Smoky Mountains or the Blue Ridge Parkway or the mountains out west. I just need to see mountains. Where we lived in Kentucky was beautiful. It was ridges and hollers. There was nothing flat. But all the ridges were the same height, so that wasn't really mountains. And it's actually part of the Cumberland Plateau. So my husband, for 16 years, has faithfully taken me to see mountains once a year. So I'm very grateful he has fulfilled his promise. And now, guess what? The mountains are closer than they were in Kentucky. In Kentucky, they were 3.5 hours away. Now they're like, what, less than 2 hours away? So we've moved up by coming out here. We're closer to the mountains. But there was one thing that all my life I said I would do when I got married. And that was I wanted to see the Grand Tetons. I wanted to see Yellowstone National Park. I wanted to see Glacier National Park. and I wanted to see Mount Rushmore. Now, Yellowstone, I had seen once when I was 6 years old for 30 minutes. But you can imagine for 30 minutes at 6 years old, you can't really see much of Yellowstone. Okay, I think I saw a mud pot, and that's all I saw. So it was my life dream to come back someday as an adult with my husband and watch Old Faithful Geyser and see the mountains around Yellowstone. And of course, the Grand Tetons I had never been to. Glacier I had been to once at 8 years old. We had spent one weekend camping in Glacier, and I fell in love with the mountains there. So I was like, I want to go back there. And Mount Rushmore, I was there for about 5 minutes, so I wanted to see it again. And so this was my bucket list that formed when I was like 10 years old. And so when my husband and I got married, he said, where would you like to go for your honeymoon? And I said, I would like to go to Yellowstone, Grand Tetons, Glacier, and Mount Rushmore, do a driving tour, just see them all, maybe a day or two at each spot, and make a nice honeymoon out of it. And he's like, that's a great idea, because when we got married, all of our family and friends, as wedding gifts, gave us all their old furniture. Okay, so, everything from a piano to a sofa to recliner chairs and, beds and the whole 9 yards, table, chairs, so we didn't really have to buy furniture, but we had to rent a 26-foot Penske to haul the furniture to Kentucky. So my husband said, let's just take a driving tour with the Penske truck, and we'll just stay in a hotel in each spot and call that our honeymoon, and we'll go to all those places on our way from Washington State to Kentucky. Makes sense? And so I was like, great, that's a great idea, let's do that. And so we pulled out. It was end of March, beginning of April, and we pulled out with our Penske truck, and our first stop was Spokane. It was about a 2-hour drive to Spokane, Washington, from where my parents lived on the Canadian border. And we pulled into Spokane. We pulled into our first hotel that we had just booked for the night. We were going to spend the night there and go on the next day so I could see the scenery in the daylight. That's really what I wanted. And we pulled up the weather forecast. And the weather forecast said, snow starting at 9 p.m. Well, it was 8:30, okay? Snow starting at 9 p.m., blizzard conditions, snowstorm starting in Spokane, moving through Idaho, Montana, and down through Wyoming. Well, guess what? That was our route. And just the week before, the interstate had just opened from a blizzard because the interstate had been closed for 4 days. And they're predicting another blizzard starting right then, like in 30 minutes. And all I could think about was, we're going to get in a hotel tonight here in Spokane and end up staying in Spokane for 4 days because the interstate's closed again and we can't go anywhere. So I told my husband, I said, well, we only have one option, start driving. So he started driving and we started going. We went through Idaho into Montana. About midnight, he told me, he says, I can't drive anymore. I said, okay, no problem. We brought a sleeping bag. So you get in the, we had a big bench seat. So I was like, you get in the sleeping bag and I'll start driving. And I took the midnight to 6 a.m. shift. Every time we stopped for gas, it started snowing. And as we pulled out of the gas station, we would drive through snow for about 30 minutes, and then we get to clear roads again, and we just keep going. At 6 a.m., I woke him up. I was like, you got your 6 hours of sleep. I can't drive anymore. It's your turn. And so I crawled in that sleeping bag, and we took 6-hour shifts driving or sleeping in that sleeping bag. We had packed some loaves of bread and some peanut butter and jelly and some fruit in a bag, so we didn't have to stop for food. We just kept going, ate in the car. We went for 40 hours straight. We made it to Lincoln, Nebraska, where I have an aunt. And I was like, okay, she has a real bed. We can stay here for a couple nights. And we let that storm blow over. And the storm kept going, went into Missouri and all the way into Kentucky as an ice storm when it got there. And thank God it blew over us. And after a couple of days of letting it go, we got back in our truck and drove the last 18 hours to Kentucky. And we said, you know what? We're young, newly married, We'll be okay without a honeymoon. We'll do it sometime later. You know what happens when you say that? Later doesn't come. Well, 5 years later, my dad had a massive heart attack. My parents sold their house in Washington State and moved to Kentucky to be next to us, so I could help take care of my father. And thank God he survived, but he lived for another 8 years. So my mom and I took care of him in the restaurant. We opened Kristina's kitchen. My parents worked in the restaurant with me. And then there was no reason to go out west anymore because my parents were in Kentucky. So he said, well, maybe sometime later. Then my father passed away. And then my mother moved to Montana. And I told my husband, I said, now is our chance. Mom's in Montana. Have you seen prices of tickets? At the time, of course, it was right after COVID. The price of plane tickets was like, $800 a ticket for me to fly to Montana to visit my mom. I was like, you know what? For the price of plane tickets, we could see a whole lot of sights and go camping along the area if we had something that we could camp in. And my husband's like, yeah, maybe someday we'll get, a camper or something. And I took someday as okay, so I started hunting. And by God's grace, after about 4 months of hunting, we found, and if you could just flip over 2 more slides. Yep, you all know what that looks like, right? Little did we know that we were buying our house. But we bought that camper a couple years ago. And we said, okay, now we can start planning our trip. And so we planned our trip. We had everything all planned out for the following year to go visit. We were going to see my mom, and we had everything all mapped out, everything planned. We were ready to sit down and, purchase campgrounds because you have to do it 6 months in advance. And my mom called up and she said, I'm getting married. And I said, well, wonderful. Can you plan your wedding at this time? Because this is the only time that we could come out with our camper and we can fit it in our route. No, I want to get married in May. Well, in May, the campgrounds aren't open yet. Glacier campgrounds don't open till June. So I was like, okay, well, we will fly out then. So we spent our money to fly out. And we planned our trip for the following year. And so that was last summer. We finally did our honeymoon. We'd been married for 14 years, and there we did it. And so go ahead to the next slide. The mountains did not disappoint. This was just, whoops, there was no pictures. All right. This, when it shows up, was just before we got to the Grand Tetons. Daniel said, I can't fly my drone in the Grand Tetons, but I can fly it outside the park. And so I told him, I said, okay, you fly your drone and I will take pictures. And so you will get to see some pictures soon. But while we were out there and we were enjoying the beautiful mountains, just incredible mountain views. There we go. How do you like that for a view? My husband's like, I'm sorry it took so long for me to fly my drone. I'm like, it's okay. I could look at this view all day. Go ahead to go to the next picture, and you will see the Grand Tetons, our first glimpse of the Grand Tetons right at sunset, just as the sun slipped over the mountain. We couldn't have planned better timing, and we didn't even plan it. God did. As we were out there in the mountains, I said, you know what, God, you have lessons that you want to teach me, and I want to learn the lessons from the mountains. So I'm going to take you on a journey now. Open your Bibles. I'm going to take you on a journey through the Bible as we look at the pictures of the mountains. You can go ahead and switch to the next picture. You will see what I do when I'm in the mountains. This is my happy place. It's the mountains. But you know what? God uses mountains in Scripture. Turn to Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. This is the first time that we see mountains mentioned in the Bible. Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. And we find Moses, right? He's in the wilderness, he's herding sheep, and all of a sudden he finds a burning bush. You all know that story, right? God calls him from the burning bush, says, Moses, I have a purpose for you. I have a plan for you. Does anyone know where Moses was? Mount Horeb. You are correct. Mount Horeb is where Moses was. God called to Moses on the mountain. Obviously, it wasn't a mountain like this one. You can go ahead and turn to the next slide. But he says, Moses, I have a work for you to do. And as I was out there in the mountains, God was speaking to me as well. And he said, Kristina, I have a work for you to do too, if you will just be willing to follow me. Turn over to Exodus chapter 33 and go ahead and flip to the next picture. It's my favorite picture of the Grand Tetons. Whoops, I think we flipped more than one picture here. Go back one. Just one photo there. Oh, well, somehow it's not showing. Okay, that's all right. Slide 18 is what we want. No, it's gonna be slide 19. There you go. My favorite picture. We can't miss my favorite picture. I mean, what better can you get? A picture of my favorite mountains with my favorite guy in the picture. Exodus chapter 33, verses 21 through 23. God is talking to Moses again, and we find Moses is on the same mountain again. This is Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb is also known as Mount Sinai, the same mountain where God gave Israel the 10 Commandments. Moses is here again, and Moses says, God, I want to see you. And God says, well, if you see me, you'll die. But I want to fulfill your request. So I'm going to hide you in the mountain. I'm going to hide you in the cleft of the rock. Now you can turn to the next picture. And while you are there, I'm going to cover you with my hand, and I'm going to pass by, and I'm going to show you myself. Wow. God showed Moses himself in the cleft of the rock. And what did he see? We find in chapter 34, it continues with the story, verse 6, the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. Merciful. Gracious, you can turn next picture. Long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth. These are the lessons that God wants to teach us in the mountains. He says, this is my character, and it will not change, just like those mountains. This is in Yellowstone. It was so exciting to be in Yellowstone. I actually got my dream of seeing Old Faithful at sunset, with a beautiful red sky behind. I wish I could show you the picture, but if I showed you all my pictures, we'd be here all day. It was just gorgeous. God was just painting a beautiful picture of his character to me as I saw all the different mountains and all the different scenery throughout the mountains of Yellowstone. And wow, Yellowstone is huge. We spent 2 days driving through there, and we didn't see a quarter of it. I had no idea Yellowstone was so ginormous. I can't wait to go back. But let's look and see what else God has in the mountains. If we go to Deuteronomy chapter 5, this was very fascinating for me. Deuteronomy chapter 5, Moses is reviewing the law with the children of Israel and reminding them of their past and how he had led them. And in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 2, Moses says, the Lord our God made a what? A covenant with us at Mount Horeb. And what was the covenant? If you look at those next verses, what do you see? The 10 Commandments. God says, I am giving you my covenant written with my own finger on tables of stone from the cleft of the rock in the mountain, because I love you. And this is my covenant promise to you, that if you and I can be together, keeping this covenant together, you will experience my love. You will be protected. You will get to live with me for eternity. Wow. What a beautiful promise in the mountain. So now we're going to fast forward to 1 Kings chapter 19, and you can turn to the next picture. I think the next picture we see, we're going into Glacier National Park. Now, 1 Kings chapter 19, we find the story of Elijah. And any guesses where Elijah is? Say it louder. Okay, Mount Carmel. Yes, Elijah is in Mount Carmel in 1 Kings chapter 18, right? This amazing story of Mount Carmel. But in 1 Kings chapter 19, he's not at Mount Carmel anymore. He's had his Mount Carmel experience. He's ran through the rain, right? Led the chariots through the rain. He slept the night. He was woken up by a servant saying, Jezebel's going to kill you. He ran for his life. In 1 Kings chapter 19, we find him running and running and running. We find him discouraged. We find him depressed. We find him asking God if he can die. Well, that doesn't sound like Mount Carmel anymore, does it? And where does he go? We find he goes to Mount Horeb, that same mountain again. And as he gets to Mount Horeb, God says, what are you doing here, Elijah? In verse 10. And Elijah says, God, I have been jealous for you. I have done everything you've asked me to do. I have stood for you. But your children, the Israelites, they've forsaken your covenant. They've torn down your altars. They've killed all the prophets of God. There's nobody left that believes in you except me, and now they're trying to kill me. And God says, okay, Elijah. Do you notice he doesn't rebuke him? Even though Elijah is to the point of despair, he's depressed, he's just angry, he's telling God the way he thinks it should be. And what does God do? God fed him. God gave him water to drink. He gave him a safe place to be. And then he comes and talks to him. And he doesn't rebuke him. So he says, Elijah, I want you to watch something. So Elijah's standing, and I imagine him hiding in the cleft of a rock again, right? And all of a sudden in verse 11, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind tore the mountains and broke the rocks into pieces. Oh, wow. I can just imagine Elijah just shaking in fear at all this. But God wasn't in the wind. And then, after the wind, there was an earthquake. The whole mountain shook, and rocks were just tumbling down the sides of the mountain. And Elijah's just standing there trembling. But God wasn't in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, I imagine a big clap of lightning hit, and fire broke out on Mount Horeb, and just burned and burned and burned, so hot and furious it looked like it was going to come down to him. But God wasn't in the fire. And then after the fire, a still small voice. And when Elijah heard it, he came out and he said, okay, God, I'm here. And what did God do to poor Elijah, who had been through all this, who was discouraged, who was frustrated, who was mad at God? God says, Elijah, I'm not finished with you yet. I still have a work for you to do. And that was God's voice to me as I was out there in the mountains. You can flip a couple more mountain pictures. You'll see a few pictures of Glacier National Park. Just absolutely gorgeous. God says, Kristina, I'm not finished with you yet. I still have work for you to do. He told Elijah, he said, I want you to go and anoint a prophet. I want you to go anoint a king. And by the way, verse 18, I have 7,000 people in Israel who haven't bowed their knees to Baal, just so you know. Isn't God good? Wow. Let's go to the book of Psalms and let's see what promises David writes about the mountains and the rocks. Let's go to Psalms chapter 40. Psalms chapter 40, verse 2. Actually, start verse 1. This is David's personal testimony. He said, I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined unto me. He heard my cry. He brought me out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay. We'll call that depression, right? He set my feet on a rock and established my steps. He has put a new song in my mouth, even praise to our God. Many will see it and hear and trust in God. Wow. He set my feet upon a rock. Go ahead and give us a couple more rock pictures and mountain pictures as we go through Glacier. You can just do a few of them there. Just gorgeous views. Glacier National Park. This is on going down the Sun Road. Going to the Sun Road, I guess is what it's called. We were there right at sunrise, and the alpine glows on the mountains were just incredible. Go until you see some green grass. Psalms chapter 46, verse 2. It's a promise for us. It says, God is our refuge and strength, in verse 1, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. Go ahead, 2 more pictures. Though the waters roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with its swelling. We saw some of that recently, didn't we? But yet, God says, even in that is going to happen, he says. But I am here for you. I am your refuge and your strength. Even more than those mountains. Aren't those flowers beautiful, though? This was a beautiful hike through the mountains and Glacier over near Logan Pass. If you continue 2 more pictures, you will see a beautiful view of Hidden Lake. Isn't that gorgeous? The views were incredible. But as I was out there, once again, God reminded me in Psalms chapter 61, verses 1 through 3. Psalms chapter 61, verses 1 through 3. David says, hear my cry, O God, attend unto my prayer. From the end of the earth I will cry to you. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. When we were on this trail, we had the privilege of seeing mountain goats just a few short yards away from the trail. Absolutely gorgeous. But if you continue on 2 more pictures, you'll see Medicine Lake and mini glacier. There, I was taking these pictures and I heard a noise. And I looked and I saw some mountain goats bounding just a little ways from me, and I looked over. My husband was on this little footbridge, and he was taking video, and I watched, and those mountain goats ran right onto the bridge where my husband was, and this was a narrow footbridge. This wasn't a wide driving bridge. And one of them ran top speed across this wooded bridge directly, almost touched my husband as he ran past him. Daniel is so good at focusing, he didn't even see or hear it. The other 2 stopped and they were like, wait, there's somebody on this bridge. And then they walked around and Daniel saw the movement and finally saw the 3 of them. I was like, that mountain goat was 1 inch from you. Go ahead and do about 3 or 4 more pictures until you see some spires of rock. We're going to look at some lessons from the rocks. Psalms 18, verse 2. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God in whom I will trust, my strength, my buckler, the horn of my salvation, and my high tower. Well, that's a pretty tall tower, isn't it? So we have left Montana now. Those other pictures were going through Montana, and we are now in South Dakota. And this is called the Needles Highway. And if you look, of course, those rock spires are like needles coming straight out of the ground. Really cool. Go ahead and go to the next 2 pictures. You'll see a tunnel. Just gorgeous, gorgeous. Psalms 31, verse 3, "For you are my rock and my fortress, therefore for your name's sake, lead me and guide me." Psalm 71, verse 3, "Be my strong habitation where I may continually resort. You have given the commandment to save me, for you are my rock and my fortress." I want you to turn to one more, and that is Psalm 125. We're wrapping things up, I promise. Psalm 125, verse 2. You're probably wondering this whole time, why on earth was the sermon title called As the Mountains? That's kind of a weird title, isn't it? Well, it came from this verse, Psalm 125, verse 2. It says, "As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord is round his people from henceforth even forever." As the mountains are around Jerusalem, as I was a kid and I'd look out my bedroom window and see the mountains surrounding us, or when I was out in Glacier and Yellowstone seeing the mountains surrounding us, that was the first verse that came to my mind. As the mountains are round about Jerusalem, so the Lord is round about his people. And then if we go back a couple chapters to Psalm 121, that was our scripture reading. I want to look at it one more time. "I will lift up mine eyes to the hills." What hills were those? What hills was David looking at? As he looked from Jerusalem at the surrounding hills, he probably saw some idols built on top of those hills, because not all those hills were Israelite hills. He probably saw some groves. And he says, "Where does my help come from?" Not from those groves on top of those mountains. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. The real mountains. The real mountains. That's where my help comes from. God. So I want to show you, I think we're on this one now. I want to show you a couple of pictures. One of the things that I really, really like, maybe I should stay on this. Can you hear me better at this mic, or can you hear me better on this one? One of the things I really, really liked when we were driving through the Needles Highway was the tunnels. I love tunnels. They're one of my favorite things. And so every time we'd see a tunnel, I would tell my husband, stop, I want to get a picture. So this is one of my favorite tunnels that we drove through. The next picture will show another one of my favorite tunnels. Isn't that cool? When you drive through, you're like, is my car going to fit? But it just fits, I promise. We went through that tunnel. The next picture shows some more needles, some more spires. And I'm going to share with you one more verse. "I will say of the Lord," Psalm 90, verse 2, "He is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in him I will trust." Go ahead, the next, you see more needles here. Aren't those cool? The rocks just coming straight out of the ground. I was so excited to see them. But then we got to a tunnel. Go ahead, the next picture. And I was, once again, I said, "Daniel, stop the car. I want a picture of this tunnel." And this time he said, "Why? You've already taken a whole bunch of pictures of tunnels." And I was like, "Oh, because I like how it's cool, with the just graven in through the the rock, and just stop the car right here." He says, "Are you sure you don't want me to drive a few more feet?" And I said, "Yeah, I want this view right here. I'm really, really sure." He's like, "But are you positive? I think you would like it better if I drove just a few more feet." I was like, "No, just stop the car and let me get out." And I couldn't figure out why he was saying that, because he doesn't normally do that. So I was like, that's kind of a little weird. So I got out and I took my picture of the Scoville Tunnel, and I was like, this is one of my favorite ones I've taken a picture so far. So I got in the car, I was like, okay, now you can drive your few feet and I'll get one more picture from inside the tunnel. So he drove a few feet and turned to the next picture. I was like, that's why you wanted to go a few more feet before I took that picture. That's Mount Rushmore. And you know, we marvel at this rock, the work of men's hands. How many years it took them to hand carve the president's faces into the rock. But yet we forget what kind of a mighty God we have, and what he can do for us, and what he wants us to do for him. You know, God says, you can go to the next picture, you'll see the full view of Mount Rushmore there. God says, as the mountains depart, the hills be removed, my kindness will not pass from you. And oh, I wish we had time. I would take you to the book of Zechariah, where it shows that when Jesus comes with the New Jerusalem, he's going to stand on the Mount of Olives, and the Mount of Olives will split in half and make a huge plain in between the mountain for the New Jerusalem to pass down. Oh, I long for that day so much, don't you? But until then, Jesus says to us, go ahead and go 2 more pictures. It'll be the last slide. Jesus says to you, just like he said to Elijah, what are you doing here? What are you doing? Are you doing what I have asked you to do? Are you being faithful to me? I have a work for you. Just like those mountains, I have promised to be with you. I promise to protect you, to hold your hand, to be your refuge, and carry you through. Are you willing to serve me? Friends, if this is your prayer, if you are willing, I invite you to stand right now as we sing our closing hymn. And I'm going to invite our song leaders to come lead it so I can play the piano. Hymn number 86, How Great Thou Art. And next time you see those mountains in the Blue Ridge Parkway, I pray that you will be reminded how great God is and what are you doing for him. Number 86.